history of humankind from southern Africa, around the coast. South India was the oldest part of India, across the water into Australia. You can see it by DNA. It's a very important documentary, I think, because I doubt that it's possible to see it and remain a racist. Because you just see that we all came from the same roots, and the adaptation to climate, which produced vulnerability to certain diseases, for instance, or the degree of melanin in our skin in order to get more vitamin D. Skins got lighter in order to withstand the sun. Some skins acquired more melanin. It's tiny, tiny, compared to our shared origin as humanity, and also to our individual differences and our uniqueness. So we just don't learn. It's so frustrating. I mean, I did not learn that the major inspiration and origin of the suffrage movement and the Underground Railway were native cultures. Did you? Because the women who started the suffrage movement, or a lot of them, were living in upstate New York, near the nations or tribes, 6 nations of the Iroquois Confederacy, which was huge, which occupied much of Canada and much of the U.S. and well into the Midwest. And here were these European women who had arrived from witch burnings and pogroms and such an idea of inheritance that even criminality was thought to be inherited. They had arrived from the maximum point of suffering, or their ancestors had, their relatives had, from Europe and from England. And they met a group of people who had been here for millennia upon millennia, whose paradigm of organization was the circle, not the hierarchy, who felt linked with nature, not ranked with nature, not about conquering nature, quite the contrary, and who had a completely different understanding of life. And if you read anybody from Columbus through Benjamin Franklin, you can find them commenting on this. They were shocked that even these savages, as I said, don't rape even their women captives. And they were shocked that people didn't beat their children, because a lot of the Europeans felt it was necessary to beat your children. You had to beat the devil out of your children. They were shocked by this, and Columbus goes on about how generous and kind and sharing people were, when he arrived, and then he killed them. I mean, this is the biggest slaughter in the history of mankind. 90% of the people here and in Latin America, both all of North America and Latin America, were killed by warfare or by disease. It was huge. That's why there was slavery, because for cheap labor they imported slaves from Africa. It is these two worldviews that clashed are so important to know about, because otherwise we think that hierarchy and violence and differentiation and warfare and prostitution and rape and child abuse are natural. They are not natural. They did not exist for a very tiny proportion, if at all, for 95% of human history. 95. In the last 5,000 years is only 5%, and it was probably, in most here it was only 500 years ago that we, native cultures ruled. So it was much less than 5%. And I find that hopeful, because the biggest way that people get to it is to tell us it's inevitable. It's always been like this. You know, there'll always be racism. There'll always be violence. There'll always be hierarchyism. It is not normal. So I think today we should just declare the last 500 to 5,000 years an experiment that failed. Post-patriarchal, post-hierarchical, post-racist, post-homophobic, post-bullshit. And you are its pioneers. Because you know that it's not normal and or necessary, and you know that it oppresses everybody, men as well as women, white women as well as black women. Now, wherever there is racism, all women and men, of course, but I mean especially women because of reproduction, are oppressed. White women are sexually isolated in order to maintain the purity of the white race, and black women are sexually exploited in order to, or women of color, are sexually exploited in order to produce more cheap labor. It is bad for everybody. And wherever there is sexism, men are constantly into feeling that they can't be close to their own children, that they have to go to war, that they have to be in control, that they have to be violent, shortening their lives. You know, I once figured out what you know, if you take out of the statistics for men's death, how many things are attributable to the masculine role? You know, deaths from guns, feeding, fighting, pension-related diseases, something. And it turned out they lived more than 4 years more. And so I always say to men, this movement has 4 years more life. It's not bad. And closeness to your own children. You know? I mean, what you are doing in this room is truly the key to diminishing institutionalized violence. I mean, do we need to be violent sometimes in immediate self-defense? Yes, but how much, you know, the biggest estimate I've ever seen of how much violence is in immediate self-defense is 5%. So you have the key here to diminishing violence, to raising individuals, to creating a paradigm of normalcy that is the circle and not the pyramid, and to community. And that's what we are in this room. We are in so many rooms. I mean, we are communal creatures. We need each other. You know, when we're isolated, we feel crazy and alone and wrong. And we have to keep meeting in rooms like this and in small circles where everyone can speak, everyone can listen. People ask me, sometimes reporters say, well, what one thing would you want for the women's movement? Which, of course, you can't answer. But if I could answer it, it would be a kind of feminist, womanist, mujerista, you know, AA. For the whole world. So that if you're on the Zambezi River in Zambia, you're in, you know, Kerala in India, you're here, you go to the YWCA or church, but you know that you can find a small group of people who support each other, who small enough so everyone can talk and everyone can listen. It's very important. Leaderless, free, where we can tell our stories. We haven't been sitting around campfires for all these millennia for nothing. You know, we need community. We need to tell our stories. We need to know we're not crazy and not alone. And when one group of people is kept from telling their stories, then they are in exile. Every single great social justice movement that I know of, from the Chinese Revolution to the Civil Rights movement as it was born in the South, to the women's movement as it came out of consciousness-raising groups. Everything is born from telling stories and listening to each other, and finding uniqueness and finding commonality. There's not one choice, there's both. You're both unique and shared humanity at the same time. And that's what's so important about this meeting, and about your coming together, and about all of you who are doing the most difficult single thing, which is to change in one generation a deep, deep pattern of violence. The native cultures on this continent always said that, by caution, first of all, the rule of decision in their small groups and then bigger and bigger groups was that you had to think of how this decision affected 7 generations forward. And you had to understand that if you chose to be violent, or you might have to be violent, for some reason, you had to understand it would take 4 generations to heal one act of violence. So the courage of those of you who are trying to make this change, away from shaming, away from violence, away from the idea of hierarchy is natural, is huge, 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 huge. And you are having such an enormous impact on the future. So by way of, I just came from a women's writers retreat called Hedgebrook. It's a great place. You should all look up on the web, Hedgebrook. And so I'm into stories. So I decided I would tell one story for each of my parents, but only to inspire you to tell your story and to tell the stories of the people you know. First of all, I would tell a story about my father, because he was gently brought up by a woman who, it turns out, was a suffragist. Nobody told me that, incidentally. You know, if you look in your own family, you find rebels. Nobody told you about it. They don't talk about that, you know. So he seemed to have been gently raised. And so, although he was utterly funny and charming and irresponsible and a few other things, nonetheless, his favorite story about me as a child, shows you the change in the paradigm of child rearing, was that when I was about 4, we were in a little country store together, and I asked him for a nickel, and he said, "What for?" And according to him, I said, "You can give it to me or not give it to me, but you can't ask me what it's for." That's a great thing, and he said, "That's right." And my mother, who I think deserves even more gratitude because I believe her family was somewhat violent and shaming, but who managed to change that in one generation, managed to do so really because of theosophy. People in this room remember, well, it's still out there, theosophy. It was a big movement of the late 1800s and continues. Probably might be a theosophical lodge here, I don't know. But because it believed in reincarnation, sort of, you know, their child-rearing belief was that children didn't belong to you. They were little strangers who came into your house, and you had the duty and pleasure of caring for them and helping them to become who they already were. Isn't that great? I mean, I'm so lucked out. I so wish I'd been smart enough while my mother was still alive to thank her for this. And, you know, children are not our possessions, and so much suppressing of spirit comes from believing they are instead of trying to discover their individuality. Sometimes I think of it as flowers, you know, that everybody's born a daisy or a rose, but the problem comes when you try to turn them into a tulip or a lilac. You only get an unhappy daisy or rose. So these kinds of stories, and these experiences we need to share with each other. And I would just say one more thing, which I think I find comforting in this political time, and that is that just as violence is violence in the household is the normalizer of violence everywhere else, it is the paradigm of the way violence happens, right? And we know, those of you in this room know with great pain, that the time that a woman or anyone escaping from a violent situation is most likely to be murdered is just before or just after they escape. Right? All right, now think about that. Now think about this country. We have majority support on all the issues we care about. As I was saying, in about 20 minutes, we're not going to be a majority European American country anymore. Things are changing profoundly. And that is the source of the backlash. That is the kind of killer instinct coming out in people who have a hierarchical frame of mind. So two things are true. We need to be aware of the danger and take care of each other and understand that this is a time of maximum danger in this country. And the other thing is that we're about to be free. Are there things you would like to say to each other? You can come up to the mic. Are there, or speak from where you are? Oh, there's a mic here. There's a stand-up mic there.
Can we ask you a question?
Yes, right, sure.
I'm very curious to know, in this current political climate, I find very alarming. There's a lot of things from which to choose, but what do you feel is some of the most dangerous, concerning rhetoric that you're hearing?
Well, I would say there are three most dangerous things. Mitt Romney, and Mitt Romney. Being Republican or Democratic. Yeah. The Republican Party was the first to support the Equal Rights Amendment. It was much less racist for a long time than the Democratic Party. In fact, the beginning of the shift away from the Democratic Party was the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1963, and then the old racists like Jesse Helms and so on started to move over and take over the Republican Party. It is not about being Republican or Democrat. It is about the issues. It is about a hierarchical view versus a communitarian point of view. It is huge. And it is so complete that the last time I looked, the states that still allow corporal punishment in schools are blue. Or are Republican, I mean. And the states, and they are red, and the states that outlaw corporal punishment of children are Democratic. I mean, hello? So I hope there are Republicans in this room who are going to work to take our party back. We can't have one of the two great Democratic parties, two great parties in the system controlled by nuts. Or if you have an answer, or not.
I don't have an answer, but I've been lucky enough to see you and actually talk to you one-on-one at Dan and Kathy's wedding a long time ago when you officiated. I'm friends with Dan.
This is Kathy and Jimmy. Dan Fennerty, whom I married.
They're wonderful. And I told him I was going to go see you. He knows that I just die every time. And so every time I've been able to see you, I have, and I promised him that this time I would not back you into a corner asking you a million questions. But now I have a microphone. But I have a conference, and I really wanted to say that you had, in so many ways, changed my life because I didn't know what it, when I talked to you back there, right, and I said, well, who am I and what can I do? And, I don't do anything for feminism. And you told me, write a letter, talk to somebody, get together with some girlfriends. You don't have to go out and do everything. You can make one comment. And now with Facebook and Twitter and everything, if you're respected enough to listen, if they listen to you, they will. And you also changed my life because I run this conference now, and it's a conference it's dedicated to creating community, and I'm nervous. I have to actually read it, celebrating motherhood and fostering stories of moms who are doing things differently than they're expected to be doing. So they're creating their own work. They're not doing the hierarchy necessarily. They're creating things and taking care of their children the way they need to. And that is one of the things, I'm sorry I'm talking so much, but I wanted to thank you for that because it was you saying, you do it in your own way. You can do it, and it makes such a difference. And people come up to me now, hugging me, saying, thank you so much, thank you so much.
That's the thing, it's change from the bottom up. A big part of the way we're kept from doing anything is making it think that change only comes from the top down, which is the opposite of the case. The trick to being effective is behaving as if everything we do matters. Because the truth is we don't know which things that we do matter.
Hi, thanks for being here. I've got my 8-month-old son over here, and I can't wait to tell him that he was here for the first day of post-bullshit world. I want to take back to the women in my circle we're meeting tonight, and to my friends on Facebook, some sort of concrete ideas, maybe just one, that I can share with them to do, because it feels overwhelming, the links, the stories, it feels like we have so far to go, but this is so encouraging. What could I say? What do you think would be, other than quote, that's one. What can they be doing? What can I encourage them to do?
Well, you are the ones you have the maximum knowledge of your friends in that situation, so I'm not sure that I can give you that answer. But I would just say, first of all, you and your friends are trusted messengers to a whole groups of people. They know you, they trust you. There is nothing more important on this earth than a trusted messenger, because that's how we get ideas for action, we get the information that we trust, and that expands because of the web and everything we know. So, the polls on our issues are good, but it's not going to work unless people vote. And there has been, as you can see, great effort to suppress the vote. And the voting booth is the only place where the richest and the poorest are equal. No other place. So because an election is imminent, I would say to be a trusted messenger to get your community of friends and colleagues and people you work with and neighborhood and so on, out to vote, whatever that takes, encouraging them, sitting with their kids while they go, whatever it takes.
Thank you. We have only 1 minute left, so I'm going to, if it's okay, we're extending by 5 minutes. Is that all right?
Yes, no.
Okay. So we'll have 5 more minutes, but everybody be quick.
Can you give us a few words, please, on hierarchy within our movement, in our shelters, and on our dress program, and also us modeling our work after corporations?
I can see that well, when we started out in the early days, the people who were working in the shelters were generally survivors. And so they had experienced the thing they were trying to help with. Then with state and federal funding, it got to be more about credentials. And that brought in a certain hierarchy. So I think that there's nothing wrong with credentials, and there's nothing infallible about experience. But I do think we ought to continue to look at those two streams and try to help people who are survivors get credentials, and try to help people with credentials have the experience and have a long period of experience. Before so, and we ourselves can figure this out, because when we're in a conversation and we're listening way more than we're talking, it's probably a problem. And when we're talking way more than we're listening, it's probably a problem. So, in my experience, we do it in all kinds of ways. We used to give out poker chips in meetings, and every time you spoke, you had to put a poker chip in the middle of the table. It just became very apparent who was dominating. But there are no hard and fast rules, but I think it's about consciousness of being a community and recognizing the expertise of experience and also of intellectual learning as well as emotional learning.
I'd like to thank you for being a part of the Misrepresentation documentary. And as far as organizing, I've been a part, our agency joined with the Sexual Assault Agency, and we have had 5 screenings on college campuses, and we have 2 more in the Dallas area, one coming up on September 19th at TCU, and one coming up on October 24th in Collin County. So I just wanted to thank you so much for giving your time and your wisdom to that show. If you haven't seen it, it's $20 on Amazon.com. It's worth it.
Yes, it's a very good Misrepresentation is a very good documentary on the implications of false imagery of women in the media. And when you see it cumulatively and through the eyes of young women, it's really very, very, very helpful. And also the Women's Media Center, of which I'm part of, which is the reason I was part of that documentary, because we did the research for the documentary, the Women's Media Center. You might find that useful too if you go to that website, because we're trying to monitor the news and we give extra stories that aren't in the news, and we try to make connections. I mean, I'll just give you one example. We have a project called Women Under Siege, which was born because there was a book 3 years ago, a huge anthology about sexual abuse of Jewish women during the Holocaust. The first exposure in English in 60 years of this massive sexual abuse. And so because of that, we began to connect it to what went on in Bosnia and what in the Congo and Rwanda, and make these connections of sexualized abuse and warfare. And we also train people who should be in the media, and have the expertise, but don't get up in the morning and look in the mirror and say, I see a public intellectual.
When I was 16, I was sexually assaulted. So recently, hearing some Republican backlash against audience concern about legitimate rape, it really meant a lot to me, and it was also quite surprising to hear you listening Republicans who I've made statements in the past pretty much agreeing with him. And I wanted to know your opinion on the current state of rape culture.
The best line I heard about that whole episode, of sort of women's bodies shut down and they can't be, the guy's never heard of ethnic cleansing, the guy's never looked at statistics about, which you have here, about how many women get pregnant from forced sex and all of that. The best summing up, I thought, was just think no. No, it is. I think we have got across to most people in this country, if not some folks. Because, even his supporters tried to get him to quit. We have got across, I believe, to most people that rape is not sex, it's violence.
That's right.
But we haven't got across to most people that pornography is not erotica. Porne means female slavery. Pornography means writing about female slavery or men playing the role of women. That's what it is. Erotica comes from eros, which is an idea of free will and mutual choice and pleasure. It's a different thing. We have allowed pornography to behave as if it's sex. And if we're against pornography, we're against sex? No, excuse me very much, we're pro-sex. We're against violence if we're against pornography and throwing it at, not that, we want to censor anything, but we have a right to throw it out of our houses and not buy it and speak against it and, do everything we do as a movement.
Hi. I just want to raise something I feel like was missing a little bit from your speech. It seems very obvious to me that the origin and perpetuation of a lot of the power structures that you refer to, the authoritarianism, the patriarchy, et cetera, are either explicitly or implicitly through the societies we've become used to in the Western world, religious, the Abrahamic religions especially. And I know that that's a bit of a dichotomy because religion is also where a lot of people sort of see their moral compass coming from. So do you have any commentary about how we can address that?
How long do we?
That could be a whole discussion.
Okay, monotheism is not part of the solution, it is part of the problem. Every time God looks like the ruling class, we're deep shit. Cultures and still continuing cultures, whether the Kwe and San in Africa or our original cultures here, which have amazingly survived, that God was present in everything, in nature, in human beings, in animals, in everything. And the most illuminating thing that ever happened to me was that I went down, I made that trip on the Nile, the trip from the African parts of the Nile, the Nubian parts, as they say, to Cairo, and the oldest parts to the newest parts, and you just see in the carvings and the temples that God was everything. God was butterflies and papyrus and everything in the beginning, and then you go a few hours more, 1,000 years later, the goddess has a son and no daughter. Then pretty soon the son is the consort. Then the pharaoh is sitting on a throne that's the goddess. Then you get to mosques where no representation of women or nature are allowed. And I was reading Henry Grested, a great Egyptologist of the late 1800s, who said, monotheism is about imperialism in religion. Sort of please your head right up. So it doesn't mean, there are people inside all the great religions trying to universalize them again, trying to depersonify and depriestize, and take them back. But politics are religion and religion is politics, and in a lot of ways, religion is just politics you're not supposed to talk about.
Last question. Hi, Gloria. First, I just want to say thank you for coming to Texas for meeting more women who are feminist-minded. Aside from that, I'm 30 years old. I grew up with the world rock movement, and I find a lot of my contemporaries don't find a need for feminism anymore. How do you address people who do not see a need for feminism in our culture?
Well, I try to point out whatever is happening, people are graduating in debt, huge debt, right? More than the whole credit card debt of the country, campus debt. It's bad for everybody, women and men, but it's worse for women because we earn $2 million less over our work time, over our work life. Harder to pay back those debts, and you can't bankrupt them. It's worse for people of color because they're also discriminated against. So, I just try to point out what's happening, and if none of that works, I just wait. Like radicalize. But it's important important to say, I think, that in my experience and in the, if you look at public opinion polls, young women are much more feminist than older women. And part of the idea that young women are not feminist, or whatever word they want to use, you know, girls with 3 R's, great, is part of the backlash. You know, trying to, first they told us we couldn't do it, and then we did it anyway, and now they say, well, it's, you know, it was fine then, but it's not necessary anymore. It's just part of the backlash.
All right, well, on behalf of the Texas Council on Family Violence, I wanted to thank you, Gloria Steinem, for coming to Austin. Really appreciate it. And for those of y'all that are registered to attend the reception with Gloria Steinem, that will start in about 5 minutes. Please everybody give Gloria a big...
Wait. All right, do you all know each other? Okay, I'm just not sure whether you know. So look and see 3 or 4 people you don't know. And before you leave, sort of introduce yourself, say what you're doing, what you care about. If you're here, you know, you care about many of the same things, you'll end up with a new friend, a new subversive colleague,